On the 19th of May 2012, Chelsea Football Club would finally win the Champions League after many years of coming so close. The Blues would defy the odds and beat Bayern Munich on penalties in their own backyard. Chelsea would also win the FA Cup that season, beating Liverpool 2-1 at Wembley Stadium. Both trophies came under the interim-ship of Chelsea legend Roberto Di Matteo, who took over from Andre Villas-Boas after the Portuguese was sacked after many disappointing results and performances. On the 13th of June 2012, Roberto Di Matteo would be announced as Chelsea's permanent manager, signing a 2-year contract. The Italian no doubt deserved the full-time job after there were whispers and rumours that Abramovich could potentially turn to another manager. Pep Guardiola, who stood down as Barcelona coach after 4 years in the summer of 2012, was linked with the job at Stamford Bridge, but the Russian would reward Di Matteo with the full-time job after delivering the Holy Grail. As always, Chelsea were linked with the best players and prospects in the world. Eden Hazard, who is pretty much wanted by every big club, would infamously announce which club he was going to sign for on Twitter. The Belgian was signed from French club Lille for £32 million. He was no doubt one of the biggest talents in football at the time, and he had played a big part in Lille's double-winning season 2 seasons prior and scored a goal of the season. He had also won Ligue 1's Young Player of the Year for back-to-back seasons and would be named the League's Player of the Year for 2 seasons in a row. The Belgian was also named in the French League's Team of the Year for 3 seasons in a row. Montpellier shocked the world by winning the French League in 2011-2012, and Lille had failed to win a trophy, but Hazard had an exceptional individual season, scoring 20 league goals, 22 in all competitions, and was the top assist provider in the league. Chelsea had secured a truly talented player. Eden's younger brother, Forgan, would also join Chelsea from Lens not long after. Another big young talent would come along in the Brazilian attacking midfielder Oscar, who was signed from Internacional. Highly rated Marco Marin would also join Chelsea after agreeing to join the club in April. Defender Cesar Azpilicueta and winger Victor Moses would both join Chelsea on the same day on the 24th of August. They were both signed from Marseille and Wigan Athletic respectively, and they were both signed for just £7 million. In the outgoings, Raul Meireles would leave Chelsea after just 1 season, and he would join Turkish team Fenerbahce. Meireles was only with Chelsea for a short time, but he was a very solid player and is remembered for that superb goal against Benfica in the second leg Champions League quarter-final tie at Stamford Bridge. Jose Busquets left for Queen's Park Rangers after 4 years at the club. Solomon Kalou would effectively be Eden Hazard's replacement at Lille as he joined the French team after 6 years' service at Stamford Bridge. Kalou for sure had his moments in the Chelsea shirt and no doubt did his bit in the trophies the club had won during his time. Many Chelsea players, mainly the young players, would go out on loan. The most significant ones were Lukaku going to West Brom to gain some Premier League experience after being a bit part player for Chelsea the previous season, and promising midfielder Kevin De Bruyne would join Werder Bremen. Yossi Benayoun would join his former club West Ham on a short-term deal until January. Michael Essien would join former manager Jose Mourinho at Real Madrid on a season-long loan. The Ghanaian midfielder was hoping to get back to his best form after years of frustrating injuries and setbacks. Last but certainly not least, the legendary Didier Drogba would depart Chelsea Football Club. The Ivorian would leave Stamford Bridge after 8 fantastic years, 341 appearances, 157 goals, 3 Premier Leagues, 4 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, 2 Community Shields, and of course that Champions League where the big man for the big occasion would score the equaliser for the Blues with an unbelievable header which led the game to go to extra extra time and then penalties, where of course he scored the winning penalty in his final kick for the club. No doubt one of the greatest players that ever put on the blue shirt, and there are simply not enough words to describe how much of a legend Didier Drogba is at Chelsea, a player who always wore his heart on his sleeve and of course scored so many big goals for the club. 9 goals scored in 9 finals, a truly unbelievable record for a phenomenal player. The Blues would no doubt have a big hole to fill as he joined former Chelsea teammate Nicolas Anelka at Shanghai Shenhua. The European champions would only win 1 out of their 5 pre-season games and would play champions of England Manchester City on the 12th of August in the Community Shield final. City won the league on the last day of the season in possibly the most dramatic fashion in English football history and would play FA Cup holders Chelsea at Villa Park. It was not at the usual Wembley Stadium this time due to the use of Wembley during the London 2012 Olympic Games. Eden Hazard would make his Chelsea debut and the Blues would go 1-0 up, with Fernando Torres breaking the deadlock in the 40th minute. However, Branislav Ivanovic would get sent off just 2 minutes later as Chelsea went now down to 10 men. Man City would score all 3 goals in the second half in just 12 minutes as the Serbians' red card clearly changed the dynamic of the game. Ryan Bertrand would come off the bench and pull one back as he pounced on a Pantilimon mistake to score his first ever goal for Chelsea. However, City held on as the champions of England would come out as winners in this Community Shield final. Chelsea would bounce back a week later as Wigan away would kick off their 2012-2013 Premier League season. Eden Hazard would have a memorable Premier League debut as he set up Ivanovic, who made amends for getting sent off the week prior and put Chelsea in the lead. Chelsea's new Belgian winger would win the Blues a penalty just 5 minutes after Ivanovic's opener. Frank Lampard would bury his penalty. Both goals in just 7 minutes proved to be enough as Chelsea came out 2-0 winners and Hazard got man of the match on his Premier League debut. New boys Reading would come to Stamford Bridge on match day 2 in the midweek clash. Hazard once again won Chelsea another penalty and Lampard scored from the spot, but the Royals would find themselves leading at half-time thanks to 2 goals in 4 minutes by Brezniak and Guthrie. However, a fine goal from Gary Cahill got the equaliser, with Torres getting on the score sheet, and Ivanovic would put the game to bed with practically the last kick of the game, as the hosts would capitalise on Reading's goalkeeper, leaving his goal to try get an equaliser. A 4-2 win for Chelsea in this entertaining game. Newcastle were comfortably beaten the following game where Eden Hazard scored his first goal for the club as Chelsea were awarded a penalty for the 3rd game in a row and Hazard would step up and bury his penalty. He then set up Torres, who scored a great goal as Chelsea made it 3 wins out of 3 in the Premier League. The month of August would end in European duties. The holders would find out their Group E opponents in the Champions League group stage draw. All 3 of Chelsea's opponents were their respective national champions in Italian champions Juventus, Ukrainian champions Shakhtar Donetsk and Danish champions Nordsjælland. A day later, the Blues competed in their first UEFA Super Cup final since 1998, but it would not be as successful as their last appearance, as Atletico Madrid would beat Chelsea 4-1. Radamel Falcao ran riot in the first half as he scored a superb hat-trick. Miranda made it 4-0 before Gary Cahill got a consolation goal. Atletico deservedly won the Super Cup as the Europa League winners outclassed the Champions League winners, who clearly missed the presence of John Terry, who was still serving his European suspension for his sending off at the Nou Camp in the Champions League semi-finals the previous season. After the international break, Chelsea would drop points for the first time in the Premier League season as they drew blank away to QPR. This game was once again overshadowed by the Ferdinand Terry incident. QPR's defender refused to shake John Terry's hand due to last season's incident at Loftus Road, and he also refused to shake the hand of Ashley Cole as Chelsea's left-back stood as character witness in court for Chelsea's captain. And there was also a big controversy over a tweet from Anton's brother Rio in the summer. The Champions League holders started their defence of the title at home against Juventus. Oscar, on his first start for the club, would score 2 goals, with the second goal being a special one, to give the Blues a 2-0 lead over Antonio Conte's men. However, Juventus would peg Chelsea back, and it would end 2-2, a frustrating evening for the Champions League holders. The Blues would scrape a 1-0 win over Stoke City, thanks to a late winner by Ashley Cole. The hunt for the League Cup would start with a home tie against Wolverhampton Wanderers, the 5th competition Chelsea had played in just 9 games of the season, and the Blues would win in style as they would win 6-0 over the recently relegated Midland side, as Azpilicueta, Lucas Piazon and Oriol Romeu made their debuts for Chelsea. 6 goals scored, with 6 different goal scorers in Gary Cahill, Ryan Bertrand, Juan Mata, Oriol Romeu, Fernando Torres and Victor Moses all getting on the score sheet. On the 29th of September, Chelsea would travel to the Emirates in the biggest and most testing game of the Premier League season so far. Torres kept up his good start to the season with an opener in the 20th minute. However, Gervinho would equalise for the Gunners in the 42nd minute, but in the second half, Juan Mata would ultimately get the winner for the Blues, as Chelsea remained in top spot as they edged their London rivals in the derby. Northland and Norwich were then comfortably beaten in the next 2 games, and after the international break, Chelsea would travel to White Hart Lane in another derby in the Saturday lunchtime kick-off. This was the first game of John Terry's match suspension, as the FA would find Chelsea's captain guilty of racially abusing QPR's Anton Ferdinand in an independent investigation. But Chelsea would do just fine without their captain, as they would win 4-2 at White Hart Lane in a very entertaining game. Tottenham appointed Andre Villas-Boas in the summer, and he would face his former club for the first time since he was sacked in March. Gary Cahill's rocket volley would put Chelsea 1-0 up in the first half. Tottenham came out fighting in the second half, as former Blue William Gallas would equalise in the 47th minute, and Jermaine Defoe would give Tottenham the lead just 7 minutes later, but Juan Mata scored 2 fantastic goals in 3 minutes, and the Spaniard would set up Daniel Sturridge to wrap up the win in the 91st minute, as Chelsea won at White Hart Lane in the Premier League for the first time since 2005. Chelsea would then meet Shakhtar Donetsk for the first time in their history as they travelled to Ukraine for their 3rd group match of the Champions League. However, it would be a bad night at the office for the Kings of Europe as they would lose 2-1. Manchester United would then visit Stamford Bridge for a Premier League encounter. The Red Devils would find themselves 2-0 up in the first half, as Van Persie's deflected shot would go down as a David Luiz own goal, but the Dutchman would get on the score sheet for definite as he buried his chance from Antonio Valencia's cross to make it 2-0. Juan Mata's spectacular free kick would give Chelsea a lifeline just before half-time. Ramirez would equalise for the Blues in the second half. However, Chelsea's afternoon took a turn for the worst, as Branislav Ivanovic was sent off for a foul on Ashley Young, despite making no contact with Manchester United's winger. Fernando Torres was also sent off for diving, even though Johnny Evans had made contact with Chelsea's number 9. Javier Hernandez, who was without a doubt one of Chelsea's biggest nemesis at the time, as he loved scoring against the Blues, would get the winner. Replays had showed he was offside. Chelsea once again felt like they were let down by match officials, just like in last season's game at Stamford Bridge. There was also big controversy over John Obi Mikel and referee Mark Clattenburg after this game. Ramirez had claimed he had heard Clattenburg say to Mikel, "Shut up, you monkey." Mikel had said he had not heard this himself, but became enraged learning of it. The Nigerian midfielder had attempted to physically confront the referee after the game in the dressing room and would threaten him. However, after an investigation by the police and the FA, it was found there was no evidence to support Mikel's claim, and Clattenburg was eventually cleared. John Obi Mikel would receive a 3-match ban and a £60,000 fine after admitting the charge of threatening and or abusing and or insulting words or behaviour. But the Blues would have their revenge just 3 days later as they would host the Red Devils once again at Stamford Bridge, but this time it was in the League Cup. Ryan Giggs put United 1-0 up. David Luiz would equalise with a penalty. Javier Hernandez once again scored for United as they found themselves back in the lead. Gary Cahill would make it 2-2 in the second half. Nani's well-worked goal would put the visitors in front for the third time. In the 95th minute, Chelsea were awarded a penalty and Eden Hazard would calmly roll it in as the tie would go to extra time. In the first half, Daniel Sturridge put Chelsea in the lead for the first time in the game, and Ramirez would then give Chelsea a 2-goal cushion as he made it 5-3 to the hosts. Ryan Giggs would, however, score a penalty to give Man United some hope, but Chelsea held on to go through to the next round, an absolute classic game between Chelsea and Man United. Juan Mata would win Premier League Player of the Month for October, but November 2012 was a very bad month for Chelsea. The Blues would draw 1-1 away to Swansea, and Di Matteo's men would then get a big win over Shakhtar Donetsk in the Champions League at the Bridge. Torres put Chelsea 1-0 up, capitalising on a mistake by Andre Piatov. But Brazilian Willian would equalise for the visitors. Oscar made it 3 goals in 3 Champions League games as he would lob Shakhtar's keeper from about 40 yards out. Willian once again would equalise for the visitors, but in the dying moments of the game, Victor Moses would get his second goal in 2 games as he would score Chelsea's winner in the 94th minute that made Stamford Bridge erupt. Liverpool at home were out next for the Blues, and John Terry marked his return to the side to give Chelsea the opening goal with his 50th career goal with a trademark John Terry goal. Luis Suarez's header would share the spoils as the game would end in a 1-1 draw, and Chelsea would also suffer a massive setback as Terry got injured in this game and he would be out of action for a while. Di Matteo would lose to his former club in the next game as West Brom beat Chelsea 2-1 at the Hawthorns. An away trip to Juventus was up next for Chelsea in the penultimate game of the Champions League group stage, and the Italians would comfortably beat the European champions 3-0. Chelsea were now on the verge of being knocked out of the Champions League. Just a day after the defeat to Juventus, on the 21st of November 2012, Chelsea Football Club sacked Roberto Di Matteo. This decision angered Chelsea fans as they thought it was an extremely harsh one, as the club legend had just led Chelsea to an FA Cup win just 8 months earlier, and of course delivered the club their first ever Champions League. Despite the poor defence of the Champions League, Chelsea were only 4 points behind league leaders and champions Manchester City. They sat in 3rd place on the Premier League table at the time, and they were still in the League Cup. It was widely agreed that the Italian deserved more time to turn things around. To make matters worse, Di Matteo's replacement could not be any more unpopular, as Abramovich would turn to former Liverpool manager Rafael Benitez. Despite his impressive CV, the Spanish manager was extremely unpopular with the Chelsea fans due to his previous comments about them in the past and the general connection he had in one of Chelsea's biggest rivals in Liverpool. Benitez was brought in on an interim basis, and no doubt one of his biggest priorities was to get the best out of Chelsea's £50 million man Fernando Torres, as Chelsea's number 9 without a doubt played his best football under his former Liverpool manager. The Chelsea fans would make their feelings known towards Chelsea's owner, and throughout the season the fans would sing in the stands, This This would be sung in the 16th minute of essentially every game for the rest of the season in tribute of the number he wore during his playing days at the club. There were also many chants of It was clear as day that the Chelsea supporters were not happy with the appointment of Rafael Benitez. The Benitez era would start off with a home game against champions Man City. The Spanish manager got a cold and unwelcome reception to Stamford Bridge. It would be honours even in a forgettable 0-0 draw. Chelsea's new interim boss would have to wait a little while longer for his first win as Chelsea drew 0-0 once again, this time to Fulham in the midweek clash. Chelsea ended the month without a Premier League win. December would start off horribly as Chelsea lost 3-1 to West Ham in the lunchtime kickoff in a very miserable day at Upton Park. Mata scored the first goal of the Benitez era, but Chelsea completely fell apart in the second half as the hosts would put three past them. The Chelsea fans would sing "Roman Abramovich, is this what you want?" in the away end on this day, as Chelsea were now without a league win in 7, their worst league run in 17 years. Benitez would get his first win as Chelsea manager as the Blues ran riot against Northland, winning 6-1, but the win was ultimately meaningless as Chelsea had crashed out of the Champions League. The Blues were relying on Shakhtar Donetsk to do them a favour by beating Juventus. Juventus would defeat the Ukrainians by 1-0, and despite having the same points as Shakhtar and scoring more goals and having a better goal difference, Donetsk would go through instead of Chelsea as they had scored 2 goals at Stamford Bridge, where Chelsea had only scored 1 goal at Shakhtar's stadium. 1 away goal had sealed the holders' fate in the Champions League and bitterly ended the defence of the Champions League. Chelsea would be relegated to the Europa League knockouts. The Blues had finished 6th in the Premier League the previous season and would be playing in the Europa League if it wasn't for the Champions League win in Munich. Perhaps it was a sign of what was to come. Chelsea have the unfortunate title of being the only holders in Champions League history to fail to reach the knockout stages from their group. The club would be competing in the newly formatted Europa League for the first time. The Blues last played in the competition back in 2002-2003 under Claudio Ranieri when it was called the UEFA Cup, before the rebrand and rename in 2009. Chelsea were hoping for a much better performance than the last time they had played in the competition. Rafael Benitez would get his first Premier League win as Chelsea manager after the Blues comfortably beat Sunderland at the Stadium of Light, a double for Torres and Juan Mata scoring before Adam Johnson got a consolation goal, gave Chelsea a 3-1 win, ending an 8-game winless run in the league. On Thursday, the 13th of December 2012, Chelsea Football Club would compete in the Club World Cup competition for the first time in their history. The winners of the 6 continental confederations, as well as the host nations league champions in a straight knockout tournament in Japan. Chelsea would open their campaign at the semi-final stage against CONCACAF Champions League winners Monterrey of Mexico, and the European champions would book their slot in the FIFA Club World Cup final after winning 3-1 for the second game in a row. But Chelsea would lose in the FIFA Club World Cup final to Brazilian side Corinthians 3 days later as the Copa Libertadores winners edged the European champions with a 1-0 win. Paulo Guerrero with the winner in the 70th minute. The Blues would have to settle for a runners-up medal. Chelsea had lost another final and once again clearly missed their captain John Terry as he was ruled out of the Club World Cup tournament due to the knee injury he picked up against Liverpool. Chelsea would go on to win their next 4 games in a row. Old rivals Leeds would be thrashed 5-1 at Elland Road in the quarter-finals of the League Cup. The Blues would find themselves 1-0 down at half-time thanks to Luciano Becchio, but Chelsea scored 5 goals with 5 different goal scorers in Mata, Ivanovic, Moses, Hazard and Torres, making sure Chelsea were in the semi-finals of the League Cup. Aston Villa would then visit Stamford Bridge the following Sunday, and Chelsea matched their biggest ever Premier League win. Villa suffered the same fate as Wigan Athletic did when Chelsea won 8-0 on the final day of the Premier League season to wrap up the title at the end of the 2009-2010 season. Torres scored his 7th goal in 6 games as he headed Chelsea in front. Luiz scored a fabulous free kick to double the lead before Ivanovic put the Blues 3-0 up. Lampard with a beautiful goal on his 500th Premier League appearance. Ramirez nutmegged Guzan to make it 5. Oscar's penalty made it 6. Hazard's magical goal made it 7. Lucas Piazon was denied his first Chelsea goal as he was kindly given penalty duties. However, Guzan pulled off a good save. Ramirez would get his second to wrap up this fantastic win. A Boxing Day win at Carrow Road would follow as Juan Mata scored the only goal as Chelsea won 1-0. The year of 2012 would end in a trip to Goodison Park on the 30th of December. Steven Pienaar gave the Toffees an early lead, but Frank Lampard would score twice to earn Chelsea their first Premier League win at Goodison Park since 2008. The year of 2013 would start off with an embarrassing home defeat to West London rivals and bottom of the table QPR. Lampard scored a goal that was ruled offside in a very close call. Former Chelsea man Sean Wright-Phillips would get the eventual winner in the 78th minute. That day was also the day that Chelsea announced the signing of Demba Ba from Newcastle after triggering his release clause that was £7 million. The Senegalese striker had scored 16 goals the previous season and had already bagged 13 prior to joining Chelsea. Yossi Benayoun would return to the club after his short loan spell at West Ham was up. The club also announced the departure of Daniel Sturridge, who would go to Liverpool for £12 million. The striker scored 24 goals in 96 appearances, winning a Premier League title, 2 FA Cups and the Champions League. The defence of the FA Cup began with an away trip to Southampton, and Chelsea would win 5-1, coming from 1-0 down, as Demba Ba got 2 goals on his debut, and Frank Lampard would move up joint second with Kerry Dixon in Chelsea's all-time goal-scoring list as he scored his 193rd goal for the club. Ivanovic and Moses also got on the score sheet. Would be up next, and Chelsea would face Swansea, the first leg being at the Bridge, but the Swans would come away as 2-0 winners in a surprise loss for the Blues. Michu, who was having a fantastic debut season in English football, would pounce on Ivanovic's mistake to put the away side 1-0 up. Ivanovic would make another big mistake and gift Danny Graham a goal in effectively the last kick of the game, as Chelsea had big work to do in the second leg tie in South Wales, a truly night to forget for Chelsea's number 2. Ivanovic's performance would pale in comparison to Jonathan Walters' performance against Chelsea in the next game as the Blues travelled to the Britannia Stadium. Walters scored 2 own goals before Lampard would slot in his penalty, and Hazard would score a super goal with his weaker foot to make it 4-0. Walters would then miss a penalty for Stoke as he hit the crossbar, a disastrous afternoon for the Republic of Ireland international, and to top this off, this was his 100th Premier League appearance. A great win for Chelsea as they had inflicted Stoke their first Premier League loss at the Britannia in 17 games. Their last defeat was close to a whole year before, and it was their heaviest defeat at their ground since their return to the top flight in 2008. However, Chelsea would frustratingly drop a 2-0 lead over Southampton in their next game as the Saints came from 2-0 down to draw 2-2. The opener was thanks to Demba Ba scoring on his home league debut, putting the Blues 1-0 up before Hazard doubled the lead with a great goal. Chelsea were in the driver's seat at half-time, but Ricky Lambert and Jason Puncheon clawed 2 back to deny Chelsea all 3 points, but a massive 2-1 win would come over Arsenal the following Sunday on the 20th of January. Mata and another penalty from Lampard put Chelsea 2-0 up at half-time. Theo Walcott did pull one back for the Gunners, but Chelsea managed to hang on for a vital victory as the champions of Europe had done the league double over Arsenal. The second leg trip to Swansea in the semi-finals of the League Cup would be up next, and the Swans would frustrate Chelsea as the Blues failed to break down the hosts, and it would end 0-0 on the night. Eden Hazard would be sent off in extraordinary circumstances as he was showed a red card for kicking Swansea's ball boy Charlie Morgan in the 80th minute. It had turned out that the 17-year-old had tweeted before the game that he had intended to waste time to put his team at an advantage, and Chelsea's winger had clearly lost patience. However, there were no hard feelings as both met in the changing room after the game. It was agreed that both were in the wrong and both had apologised to each other. Funnily enough, Hazard and Charlie Morgan would reunite just over a decade later as the Belgian helped Morgan to promote his vodka company. Clearly, both have moved on from this incident, but no doubt this was a very disappointing result and performance for Chelsea. Had the Blues progressed in the final, they would have met League Two side Bradford City, who shocked the world by reaching the League Cup final, knocking out Arsenal out of the cup before Aston Villa out in the semi-finals. Chelsea would have almost certainly beaten the League Two outfit in the final, and a big chance to add a trophy to the cabinet was missed. Swansea would memorably win the League Cup that year, winning 5-0 to win their first and, to date as of the recording of this video, their only major trophy. Attention would be turned from the League Cup to the FA Cup as Brentford away was up next in the fourth round in the West London derby. It was the first meeting between the two sides in 63 years. Chelsea had to come back from behind twice to earn a replay at Stamford Bridge as the tie would end 2-2 at Griffin Park. The next game was away at Reading, and Chelsea again dropped points to a side that was battling relegation as Reading pegged Chelsea back from 2-0 down, a third 2-2 draw in just 2 weeks. February would get off to the worst possible start as Newcastle would beat Chelsea with a late winner. Benitez's side was becoming notorious for inconsistency. A 4-1 victory over Wigan Athletic would follow as Eden Hazard would return to the side after his 3-match ban for the incident at Swansea. It would be a happy return for the Belgian as he got on the score sheet along with Ramirez, Marco Marin getting his first goal for the club, and Lampard once again getting on the score sheet. Chelsea's legendary midfielder was in the last few months of his contract and had to fight for a contract renewal as he was showing the Chelsea hierarchy that he was still a valuable player and still had plenty to offer. On Thursday the 14th of February 2013, Chelsea would play their first ever game in the newly formatted Europa League and their 8th competition of the season. It would be a 1-0 victory for the Blues as Oscar would come off the bench and score just 45 seconds later. The goal was enough for a first leg win in this round of 32 tie. Chelsea would then cruise past Brentford in the FA Cup replay as they defeated the Bees 4-0 in their professional performance. Sparta very nearly took Chelsea to extra time in the second leg tie of the Europa League, but Eden Hazard's magical goal in the 92nd minute spared Chelsea any potential embarrassment. City away was up next for Chelsea, and Lampard was denied his 200th goal for the Blues after Joe Hart pulled off a fine save to stop his England teammates' penalty kick. Toure and Tevez would seal the win for City in a 2-0 win for the hosts. John Terry was questionably an unused substitute this game. Chelsea skipper was having a difficult season due to the ongoing issues off the field, and he was enduring some injury problems this season, and Rafael Benitez did not seem to rate him highly. A midweek FA Cup away trip to Middlesbrough was up next, and Chelsea comfortably beat the Teessiders 2-0 thanks to Ramirez and Victor Moses. Nathan Ake made his first start for the club shortly after turning 18 and impressed on the night. However, Benitez would come out in the press conference after the game and he would heavily criticise
a group of fans. They are not making any favour to the team, and they are singing and wasting time preparing banners, and it's because someone made a mistake. They put my title interim manager, and I will leave at the end of the season, so they don't need to waste time with me.
After a 1-0 win over West Brom at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea would then play their 50th game of the season in a round of 16 tie in a tricky game away in Romania to Steaua Bucharest. The hosts would win 1-0 on the night thanks to Rusescu's penalty. On Sunday 10th of March 2013, Chelsea would travel to Old Trafford for an FA Cup quarter-finals clash. Man United would go 2-0 up in 11 minutes, the usual suspects in Javier Hernandez and Wayne Rooney scoring for the Red Devils, and it looked like yet another miserable trip for the travelling Chelsea fans. However, the Blues would come out fighting in the second half as they managed to come from 2-0 down and take a replay to Stamford Bridge thanks to a quality goal by Eden Hazard, and he would set up Ramirez to equalise, the Brazilian once again scoring in a big game. Chelsea would overturn their 1-0 deficit and do the job over Bucharest in the second leg tie of the Europa League. West Ham were comfortably beaten 2-0, and it was a very memorable win as Frank Lampard would score his 200th goal for Chelsea against his former club. Eden Hazard got his 12th of the season with a brilliant goal to wrap up the win. The Blues would lose away to Southampton in their next game after the international break, losing 2-1 at St Mary's. Chelsea would incredibly only have 1 day's rest as they would face Manchester United on the Easter bank holiday Monday in the FA Cup quarter-final replay. Demba Ba scored a spectacular volley from a fantastic ball from Juan Mata. That was enough to put Chelsea in the semi-finals of the FA Cup. Javier Hernandez once again nearly scored against the Blues, but Cech pulled off a sensational save to deny the Mexican striker as Chelsea grinded out a 1-0 win. Chelsea would beat Rubin Kazan 3-1 in the first leg of the quarter-finals in the Europa League with a fairly straightforward win. Fernando Torres was finding his form once again after having a difficult few months, after initially starting well under his former Liverpool manager. 3 days later, Chelsea would play their fourth game in just 8 days as they edged Sunderland in a 2-1 win as the Blues moved up to third place in the Premier League. A testing away trip to Rubin Kazan of the second leg of the Europa League would follow, and although Chelsea lost 3-2 on the night, they would go through to yet another European semi-final, winning 5-4 on aggregate. The semi-finals of the FA Cup would be up next as Chelsea faced Manchester City. Nasri put Man City 1-0 up in the first half, and Aguero doubled their lead with a great header. Demba Ba scored another great goal, as he did against United, to give Chelsea a lifeline. The Blues were denied a penalty as Company pulled Torres' shirt in the area. Aguero also got away with stamping on David Luiz, and the Argentinian striker would not even get a retrospective ban. It's fair to say that Chelsea had decisions go against them. Man City would progress into the final, where they would meet Wigan Athletic. But Wigan would cause an all-time FA Cup upset, defying the odds by beating City 1-0 in the final, winning their first and their only major trophy as of the recording of this video. Chelsea would bounce back from their semi-final heartbreak as they would face neighbours Fulham at Craven Cottage. David Luiz scored a goal of the season contender with an unbelievable strike to break the deadlock. John Terry would then score 2 goals, answering his critics and showing Benitez he still had plenty to offer as the Blues won 3-0 on the night. Benitez would return to his former ground for the first time since leaving in 2010. Oscar put the Blues 1-0 up with a header. Former Chelsea striker Daniel Sturridge would equalise in the second half. Just 5 minutes later, Chelsea were awarded a penalty for a handball on Suarez, and Eden Hazard converted. Not long after, one of the most controversial and extraordinary moments in Premier League history would happen, as Luis Suarez bit Branislav Ivanovic after Chelsea's defender beat Liverpool's striker for the ball in a completely fair tackle. No card was shown, and in the 97th minute, to add insult to injury, Suarez would score the equaliser for Liverpool. It was some game for the Uruguayan striker, who got an assist, conceded a penalty, bit an opponent, and would score a last-minute equaliser. Suarez would eventually get punished for biting Chelsea's defender. He would serve a 10-match suspension. This was not the first time that Luis Suarez would do this either. He was banned for 7 games when he was at Ajax after biting PSV's midfielder Ottman Bakel's shoulder during a match in November 2010. He clearly never learned any lesson, as he did it for a third time a year after the Ivanovic incident at the 2014 World Cup. Playing for his country, this time Giorgio Chiellini was the victim. The semi-finals of the Europa League was up next for Chelsea as they travelled to Switzerland to face Basel. Victor Moses would make it 1-0 in the first half. For the 5th time in 6 Europa League games, Chelsea would concede a penalty. Fabian Schär would convert, and it looked like Chelsea would leave Switzerland with a draw until David Luiz scored a low free kick that was buried in the bottom right hand corner in the 94th minute to give Chelsea a massive advantage in the second leg. Chelsea then beat Swansea 2-0 at Stamford Bridge in their next game. Frank Lampard would come on for Ramirez as the Brazilian came off in the 24th minute, but Lampard would come on and set up Oscar to put Chelsea 1-0 up, and then he would convert a penalty from the spot to score his 201st goal for the club. Lampard was now only 1 goal away from equalling Bobby Tamblin's record as Chelsea's all-time top scorer. The month of May would start with the second leg tie against Basel, and Chelsea were just 1 game away from the Europa League final. Mo Salah would equalise for the Swiss side on aggregate as he put the visitors 1-0 up in virtually the last kick of the first half. Chelsea would come out in the second half and would reign supreme as Torres, Moses and a classy goal from David Luiz booked Chelsea's place in Amsterdam, where they would meet Portuguese side Benfica in the final. Back-to-back European finals for Chelsea as the club would play in the Europa League final for the first time in their history. The Blues ended a great week with a 1-0 win at Old Trafford to the newly crowned champions Manchester United. A late Juan Mata goal secured all 3 points as Chelsea took a big step to securing the top 4 finish, as they still had some work to do. It was the 3rd time that Chelsea had beaten Man United in the season, and Sir Alex Ferguson would retire at the end of the season after a legendary career. Sir Alex Ferguson's final losses at Manchester United in the Premier League, FA Cup and League Cup, as well as his final defeat at Old Trafford, all came against Chelsea. It was a nice feeling of revenge after a miserable run against the Red Devils over the past couple of seasons. Spurs would be up next at Stamford Bridge in a massive top 4 clash, as Villas-Boas would return to the bridge for the first time since he got sacked by Chelsea. Oscar put the Blues 1-0 up with a header. Adebayor scored a brilliant goal to equalise. Ramirez would put Chelsea 2-1 up just 13 minutes later. Gylfi Sigurdsson would get the equaliser for Spurs in the 80th minute to share the spoils, and it would finish 2-2. On the 11th of May 2013, Chelsea would travel to Aston Villa in the lunchtime kick-off. Christian Benteke would give the home side the lead. Ramirez was then sent off for a second yellow, but in the second half, goalscorer Benteke went from hero to villain as he also got sent off, and it was now 10 versus 10. Eden Hazard would then set up Frank Lampard, and Chelsea's midfielder would equal Bobby Tamblin's record, scoring a brilliant goal. Lampard was not finished there though, as he would get his second of the afternoon and the winner for Chelsea, as Hazard would assist him for goal number 203. Super Frank had broken Bobby Tamblin's record and was now Chelsea's all-time top scorer. The Chelsea away end would go absolutely crazy and they would sing Lampard's name until at the very end. An incredible day at Villa Park, as Chelsea virtually secured a top 4 finish and would be playing in the Champions League next season. Just 4 days later, on the 15th of May 2013, Chelsea would meet Benfica at the Amsterdam Arena in the Europa League final. The Blues were looking to win the competition for the first time in their history, whilst Benfica were hunting a treble and were looking to end the so-called Bela Gutmann curse. They were looking to win their first European trophy in 51 years. John Terry would miss this final as he did the Champions League final the previous year, but this was due to an injury this time rather than suspension. Eden Hazard was also ruled out due to injury. Both Hazard and Terry picked up their injuries in the 2-1 win at Villa Park. It was a cagey first half, as it would end 0-0, but in the second half, in the 59th minute, Fernando Torres would score in yet another big European game for Chelsea, as the £50 million man would put Chelsea 1-0 up with a composed finish. The Blues would once again concede another penalty in the Europa League. This time it was due to an Azpilicueta handball. Cardoso would convert to equalise for the Portuguese side. Frank Lampard got very close in the 87th minute as he would hit the bar from a superb strike. In the 92nd minute, in unbelievable scenes, Branislav Ivanovic would score the winner with a fantastic header to win the Europa League for Chelsea Football Club. There was a heart-in-the-mouth moment as Cardoso could have very nearly equalised for Benfica almost immediately. However, Gary Cahill put in a heroic tackle to prevent this from happening. The referee would blow his whistle not long after this as Chelsea cleared to safety. The Blues were now back-to-back European champions in a night to remember in Amsterdam, winning the European trophy in dramatic fashion, a story of redemption for Branislav Ivanovic, who missed the final in Munich due to suspension. Chelsea, for a short time, were also technically the holders of the Champions League and the Europa League simultaneously, as the Blues completed the European set. Chelsea also became the 4th club and the first English club to win all 3 major UEFA club titles at the time. 4 days later, Chelsea would beat Everton 2-1 to wrap up their very busy season. Frank Lampard would be presented the Golden Boot by Bobby Tamblyn after Lampard broke his record to become Chelsea's all-time top scorer. The Blues secured 3rd place and Rafael Benitez would leave Chelsea on a high. The Spaniard had led the club to a top 4 finish and a Europa League win. Despite his unpopularity with the Chelsea fans, it wouldn't be very fair to say that he did a bad job. Although there were a fair share of lows in this hectic season where Chelsea played a record of 69 games, there were some great moments for sure. Of course, the night in Amsterdam was one to remember. The new signings generally impressed, especially Eden Hazard, who made PFL Premier League Team of the Year, along with Juan Mata, who had an unbelievable season and deservedly won Chelsea's Player of the Year and the Players' Player of the Year. No doubt Benitez deserves a lot of credit for Mata's great season, and Torres, who did have some lows during the season, managed to end the season with 22 goals in all competitions and played his best football under his fellow countryman. And of course, Lampard becoming Chelsea's all-time top scorer will forever live in the memory, along with other great moments. The 2012-2013 season was a memorable one for sure. Benitez would leave and go on to manage Napoli, and a legendary and familiar face would return to the club in the summer of 2013, which of course we will go through in my next video. Thank you as always for watching, and please take care.
Up the Chelsea!